So, hi, my name is Arpit Shah, and I am the partner SA at AWS along with my colleagues Ricardo, Jordan. So, I work with the GSIs and we work backwards as to what our customers tells us. Yeah. And that's where the open source and AWS came into picture basically. So, today I'm going to talk about AWS and how we learn from the customers and from the open source community and how AWS has been contributing highly to quite a lot of open source project. And that's what our customer wants basically. So I'm going to talk about the AWS and open source. Any questions, put it into the chat and I'll answer it towards the end or offline. Yeah. So thanks all for joining today. Um, so, what is open source software and license? So, this was a very interesting thing because I had a couple of my colleagues in my previous organization. We started talking about the open source, and as soon as we started talking about the open source, and they were working with one of our competitor cloud providers, and they said, "Open source, we don't think that's something which has a space." Because they never used it. And that's when I started realizing, saying, it's not only about the source which is available, but also people needs to be aware of what's been available and how they can use it. So, what does open source software means and the license basically? Yeah, because open source has got now over the period of time has become quite complex in terms of the licensing. So, first of all, the source code is available. But given the source code is available, that doesn't mean that you can start using it into the straight away into the production, and hence different types of licenses which exist. Yeah. So as you can see, the first one is the permissive type of license, which is what we usually see. So if you have been using Apache, any of the Apache Tomcat, Apache web servers, a lot of other Apache Spark, and those things which has been available, it's available under the Apache license. Yeah. And then the MIT license and the BSD license. These are the most flexible and permissible license which has been available for anyone and everyone to use it. Yeah. And the one which is very commonly used in the open source world to deploy and run the applications into the production workloads as well. Then the one which is we have is the copyleft license model. So copyleft license model is something which has got a stringent approach. So basically, if I have written open source utility and I have released it under a certain terms that anything which I'm releasing needs to be onto the open source, then anything which has been created on top of, which is a derivative of that utility, also needs to be under the same terms. Yeah. So you cannot have saying, I took a utility and I converted that utility, but now that utility is going to become my proprietary license model. That's not something which copylefts allow it. Yeah. So that's something which is available for the general public license. Then next we have is the lesser general public license, which is sometimes also called it a weaker copyleft. Yeah. And what does that mean is that you can use the open source library, but then you can apply under any type of license to sell or build the product out of it. And the last one, which is available, is the public domain. That means you are free to use. There are no restrictions. It can be used any way and shape you want it. And it is available for any purpose you want to use. You want to use it for the production. You want to use it you want to change the code and anything around you wanted to do it. It is available. Yeah. So there is no restriction out. Said that these are the top four type of the license model which has been used into the industry. There are many other types of licenses which has been available as well. The derivations of this particular four ones. And so you can look around the details if you are looking into. But it's important to highlight that make sure if you are planning to use the utility into the production, you are using the right type of the open source software with the right license type onto that product which has been available. Um, The next one. So why open source? So this was something which has been quite important into the communities. Yeah. So if you start building everything on your own, there is a lot of effort and time, and effort and time means cost. That means there is a lot of investment which needs to be done in order to build those softwares which needs to be doing the things. Whereas we are in the world now where we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If someone has done and solved the problem and making it available as an open source, we want to just leverage that utility or that software and try to build our business problems which can be solved using that open source utility and enhance that utility and again publish it either into the open source or reuse as to solve the business model, business problem into our industries. So that's where what we are trying to highlight through this slide is that do it yourself. It's a very costly model. Whereas you're using the open source model, there is a lot of flexibility. There is a lot of utilities which is available. One of the things which Ricardo was talking about was the Amazon Q developer. And that's something which is an open source. So you have the ability to use that software, convert it into the patterns what you want to use it, and then make a head start. Go from there, basically. You don't need to reinvent the wheel again and again to build the software. So what we have been doing in the AWS, so we have been the best place for customers. So as you know that we have nearly 1,200 open source projects which are available on GitHub, and that's a lot of things. So our ethos is that as soon as something is there and it is useful for the community, put it onto the GitHub and let the developer community and the open source community work and collaborate to work onto those things. We work with a lot of open source projects, foundations, and partners. So we work with, as on the next slide, I'll show you that one of the top contributors projects and so on. We work with the open source project. And why we are working with this is because we listen to our customers. So when we started with the AWS and we were started working backwards to the requirements of our customers, we realized that what our customer wants is more of the services which they can use it for the production purpose. And there was some challenges in order to make sure that it is ready for production workloads, and hence we started supporting those open source communities. And we are completely behind those communities, those projects, those open source projects. In fact, we are making many of the projects open source as well now as we go into. So open source is good for everyone, and we have seen a lot of customers started moving away with the license freedom part as well. Yeah, so that's the next start of the movement which we are seeing into the industry as well, where there are a lot of database into the market. Customer was locked into those, and there were a lot of license fees which was there. Customer wants to use the open source softwares which are available and managed and provided as a service to the customers. So these are a couple of top open source projects which AWS has been leading. So PostgreSQL, as you will be aware of, that Amazon Aurora, it supports the Postgres. We have the multi-region and failovers and all those capabilities which has been built into, but it's all available. So we are first providing we are updating the open source, the community project, and then we are reusing those community projects in order to convert that into the service and build the service and enhance the service and support that service for the customers. EKS distro. So we have the EKS anywhere. So if the customer is using EKS on AWS and they want to use the EKS, which is a container certified Kubernetes platform, onto the on-premise as well, it's available as an open source. Yeah, so the customer doesn't need to now worry about, hey, I'm using EKS on the cloud, but I want to run it on-premise. And how do I do that? No, it's the same distribution which is available on-premise to the customer as well in terms of the open source. Same goes with the Bottle Rocket. So Linux-based operating system for the containers. It is gaining a lot of popularity to run the containers. Open telemetry for the production monitoring, which the customer said that we wanted to use it, and AWS got behind it, and we are supporting it. Firecracker, so micro VMs. If you are creating the micro VMs, Firecracker is the way under the, again, the Apache license, but Amazon is Community has been supporting a lot onto that. Last year, we had some open source, open search, which is now been available as a service on AWS. Previous to that, we were using a open community-led project for the search engine, which has now been changed to the open search, and it's been in its true sense, it's open search, open for the community to contribute, and it's available as an open source. AWS Amplify. So if you're doing the mobile development, web application, AWS Amplify is the way to go. Similarly, AWS CDK, free RTOS, so microcontrollers based development, or you are doing the cloud infrastructure development, that's been available as a development things as well. And these are some of the open source project by the vertical. So if you are using database and analytics, we have a lot of them available. We have the computing, we have got it available. Sorry, compute nodes, if you are trying to use what you can use it around Amazon Linux and so on. If you're using machine learning, SageMaker, MXNet, Gluon, AutoGluon, developers. So as we were talking about developer Q, which has been available. We have Amazon Corretto, which is the Java JDK. So if you are using the JDK and if you want to leverage the benefit of running the JDK onto the AWS, then Amazon Corretto is the one which is widely been used now as well. Similarly, for serverless, we have serverless application management framework, which has been quite popular and quite used for the serverless development. App Amplify, we talk about AppSync as well, which is for the web development. Security is we have the open source projects as well, and storage as well, Amazon FSx for Lustre. Along with that, we do have a lot of tools and utilities which has been available on the GitHub. So for example, if you want to check that whether whether my AWS account has been configured correctly and is there any security risk. So there are tools and utilities like, I don't know if you have heard of Prowler. And we believe in making it open source. So it's been available onto the GitHub. You can use it. You can scan through the AWS account and it will tell you saying, hey, you know that security group has not been locked down. It's an open for everyone. And those kind of things as well, which has been available as an open source to the community to use it and take the benefit out of it. Few things which we are seeing as a pattern with respect to the migration and modernization. So a lot of our customers say that, I have a lot of .NET applications which has been running on to the Microsoft servers. And for that to continue, we need to still continue with the license. And we want to have the license freedom to run it onto the Linux, those applications. So we do have the .NET Port Assistant. And similarly, now that Amazon Q developer, which has been available, you can convert those .NET application to .NET Core and can run onto the Linux platform. Similarly, Microsoft SQL Server for Linux has been available. It was previously only on the Windows Server, which was supposed to be running onto, and now it's available to be running onto the Linux as well. So we do support so working backwards from the customer was saying that, hey, I want to run the SQL Server, but I don't want to learn it onto the Windows Server. And that's where this requirement starts coming into. If you want to move on to from Microsoft SQL Server to Postgres open source database to get the complete license freedom, we do have the pathway where we are supporting using AWS database migration service. So database migration service can provide you the homogeneous migration or the heterogeneous migration of the database. So you can move from one database, which is say SQL Server, to Postgres, Amazon Aurora, or you can move from SQL Server on-premise to SQL Server on AWS RDS as well. Yep. So all the options are available. And similarly, Corretto. So customers who are using the Java, which was been running on to the Oracle version of the JDK, and they wanted to move away from that. And Amazon Corretto is available as an open source for any of the Java applications. So this slide is quite impactful. So again, as I mentioned, that we work backwards with the customers, and as we were working towards onto the AWS on different open source projects, the customer said that, hey, I don't want to have an expertise, I don't have the resources, and I want to manage my risk around this open source software. So as you can see on this slide, if the customer manages of the application, then they need to have the expertise of that open source. They need to have the right resources to manage it through, and they need to make sure that the risk of those utilities has been addressed. For example, the risk can be saying, hey, a new patch has been available and it needs to be applied immediately. You need to have the right resources to manage the Postgres and how the upgrade of that Postgres needs to happen. And you need to build up the capability. If you're running 80 Postgres servers, then you need to have an expertise of how you can upgrade those servers and what are the risks around it and so on. Whereas the customer says that, hey, why don't you provide that as a managed service? So as you can see that we have a lot of services which has been available right from open source, Postgres, and on those previous slides which I was talking about as a managed service. So the model where we were like an infrastructure provider, and then from the infrastructure provider, we started providing the managed service, which leveraging the open source softwares. And those open source software, we started contributing quite heavily, and that makes it converted into the managed service for the customer. And the customer started liking those services. As an example, I was working with a customer, and we needed to do the multi-region Postgres failover for 80 database servers. And with a click on the console, we were able to fail over those 80 database in less than 3 minutes onto a completely different region. Yeah. And the customer was, wow, this is super great, basically, because in the on-premise world, if you needed to do that, there is a lot of planning and how we'll be failing over and what kind of impact will be there and all those things we were talking about. Here, we are able to see the live that it is cut over and the data has been replicated, and we can verify all the aspects which we need to get the business continuity. And that's where the customer prefers the managed service, because we have built that expertise, we have built those resources, and we have captured those risks to address those in terms of those services. Some of the open source projects, as I was saying, we are not stopping there. We are continuing right from each of the new era which we are entering into. So Amazon Q or AI, machine learnings, Nginx, Open Search, everything. We have a lot of contribution which we do to the open source. And these are few of the list where we are contributing it. So as I was saying, that we work with the managed service for open source cloud. We have the .NET porting assistant, which we're talking about. We have a long-term commitment. So we are not here. One of the things which customer ask us saying, hey, but we are looking for the long-term commitment onto this open source if we are using it. And hence AWS is here for the long-term commitment. And as you could have seen from the open source, open search, that we are not here to leave the open source community behind. We are here to take open source into the DNA which has been there onto the AWS to take it forward. Yeah. We contribute bug fixes, security, scalability, performance, any issues which our customers are facing into. And as you could have seen, Prometheus Kubernetes upstream first. We always make sure that the Kubernetes releases, it's addressed into the upstream project first, which is the main Kubernetes, before we pick it in and deliver it as part of the EKS versions. Yeah. So that's something as a ethos we have, that we make sure that it's an upstream first ethos which we have into. We work with the partners. So some of the leading open source companies like Red Hat, we have been working with them. We have ROSA, Red Hat OpenShift services, which has been running on to the AWS as what the customers are looking for. But we do work very closely with the companies like Red Hat, because again, the same philosophies they have, open source, take it as a product, contribute to the upstream first, and then move forward. And similarly, with any foundations, cloud native computing foundations, we have been working on two Apache software foundations to accelerate any of the innovations. And lastly, awareness. So we have the website, opensource.amazon.com. So anytime you are looking for any of the open source innovation which has been happening onto the AWS, you can go to the website. You can go to our Twitter @AWS Open, or you can read at the blogs, AWS Open Source blog. There is a lot of content which is available, and we are here to support the open source community at the best. Yeah, so we are committed to the open source, and we are going to take this forward as the AWS progresses. With that, thanks a lot for your time today.